is out on family leave, welcoming the newest girl into their family, the third girl into their family. So wishing her well, and you're stuck with me for the next couple months with the support of David. So bear with me. So I feel like this meeting is really an opportunity for us to start digging into some of the hard work that's been happening related to this process. So tonight we are both going to do a little bit of debrief on some of the engagement that we've been doing, get some feedback, takeaways, and this is the start of that discussion and those results. We are still compiling summary of all those different events. Those events have come in many forms, and the input, the feedback loop is in many forms. So we're working to compile all that, and I think that is up for discussion at the next meeting. But we thought it was important to do a little bit of a debrief to get some feedback on those events. And really the meat of this evening's meeting is to start talking about the existing condition reports. So you had attached with your preparation for tonight was the existing conditions summary, which really looked at the key takeaways of all, I believe it's 18 existing condition report and white papers that the RAMI team and their suite of sub-consultants have been working on. So we're going to touch on those. You probably have been inundated with the amount of reading with all of those as we have, and we will continue to let the GPAC know with emails when additional reports are being posted on the website as those become available. I think today the Public Arts and Culture was posted on the website. So we'll continue to drop emails to all of you as those become available. And then we're also taking individual existing condition reports to different boards, committees, and commissions to kind of talk about some of the specifics that individual committees and commissions have purview over. So we're doing that outreach as well. I know that it may be frustrating not to have the entire, whatever it's going to end up being, 1,500 pages of existing conditions report. But we are doing the best we can to get those rolled out to you as they become available. We're making sure that different staff members are reviewing those, as well as, the RAMI team reviewing everything that's coming from the sub-consultants. So we're doing our best to turn those around, and appreciate starting the discussion and some of that summary tonight. So I'm going to hand it back to Dave, but again, just thank you for being here. Thank you for your service and for your involvement.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Heather. And before we get started with a formal presentation, as we typically do, we're going to go ahead and open up the Spanish channel. And before we do that, I'm going to ask Mariana to read the slide.
Okay. Hola, buenas noches. Ustedes, como saben, esta reunión de Zoom puede escucharse en español. Lo pueden hacer haciendo un clic en el globito que dice Interpretation. Ahí tienen la opción de elegir el idioma de preferencia, si necesitan donde dice Spanish o español, dependiendo del idioma que tengan configurado en su Zoom. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mariana. And Eric, I'll let you open up that channel. Excellent. Looks like we're there. Great. So before we get started, as we traditionally do, I'm going to go ahead and do the roll call. I don't know if I formally introduced myself, but just in case there's anyone new here, Dave Jobby with Plan to Place, helping with all things engagement related to this project, along with the RAMI and Associates team. A couple members here tonight that you'll get to hear from here shortly. Before we get started, I'm just going to go ahead and read down this list. If you all could please let us know that you are here, and we'll get started. So I'm going to go down the list here. Dave Alden.
Here.
Excellent. Panama Bartholomew. I don't think I saw Panama. Stephanie Blake. Don't think I saw Stephanie. Phil Boyle. No, Phil. Aaron. I think I saw Aaron. Aaron, are you able to unmute yourself?
Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute me. Sorry.
There you go. Welcome. Delia Diaz.
Here.
Excellent. Mary Dooley.
Here.
Hi, Mary. Sierra Downey.
Hello.
Excellent. Jesse Feller.
Here.
Hi, Jesse. Allie Gaylord. Don't think.
Here.
Oh, hi, Allie. Hi, Yancy.
Here.
Hi, Yancy. Roger.
I'm here.
Hi, Roger. Ileana.
Here.
Hi, Ileana. Roberto.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
Chris. Bill Reinhardt.
Here.
Hi, Bill. John Shribs.
Present.
Hi, John. Josh Simmons.
Present.
Hi, Josh. Janice.
Here.
I saw Janice. Hi, Janice. And last but not least, Bill Walpert.
Hi, Dave.
Excellent. Great to see you all. Thank you so much again for joining. Okay, so as we traditionally do, I'll go through these quickly. Just a quick reminder of how we typically do the facilitation and just general Zoom instructions. We do have closed captioning available. We do hope that you have your audio on. For you members of GPAC, you'll be able to unmute yourself when we go into the discussion. But members of the public will be kept muted until we have the public comment period, and we'll take your names once you use the raise hand and allow you to unmute yourself so that we can facilitate that discussion as well. Obviously, we'd love to have GPAC members on video so that we can see you while this is a meeting for you all to get to see each other and network. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to have an opportunity for facilitated discussion, as we always do. In this case, we're all going to stay together. So we're just going to ask that GPAC members use the hand raise, and we'll go ahead and call on you that way. Then you should be able to unmute yourself. And then again, for members of the public, when we do the public comment, we ask you to also do the same. Use the hand raise function to unmute yourself. You can also dial *9 if you called in. And last but not least, for the technical issues, if there are any, you could either email Eric Robert to the City of Petaluma, or if you're following along in Spanish, it's Mariana at mrtranslation.org. So in terms of the meeting agenda, Heather did a great job of giving you a quick overview of what we're doing here this evening. The bulk of what we're hoping to share with you is regarding the existing conditions reports that you all received, to get your feedback, any questions really that you might have on those. Before that, we will do a project updates. We did have a workshop recently that we'd love to give you a quick overview of, and you might hear from some GPAC members that were there. And then as usual, we'll have public comments. It's going to come up here shortly at the beginning and near the end of the meeting. And then also we'll have a final opportunity for you all to provide some feedback. And this is a fairly targeted effort tonight, so we might actually even end early and send you on your way a little bit earlier this evening, which we hope to do. So with that, we're going to move directly into public comment. And as I mentioned earlier, if there are members of the public that at this point would like to share any comments with us, we will bring a 2-minute timer up, but if you can please use the raise your hand function and that will allow you to let us know that you have a comment to share, and we'll go ahead and unmute you and give you some time to share. And again, there will be a public comment section toward the end of the meeting as well, if you'd rather share then. It looks like we do have a hand up. Eric, I'll turn it over to you. Oh, did we lose Eric? All right, well, I will go ahead and run this then. Matt Stone, I do see your hand raised. I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute.
Got it. Thank you. And thank you to the commissioners. I'm Matt Stone, the acting executive director of the Petaluma River Park Foundation. And I don't know whether it's appropriate to draw your attention to the fact that we are a little late to the party in the existing conditions in the parks portion of that report. We do exist. We're open to the public, and we are actively beginning to plan how to develop that park and hope to be a part of this plan. One particular item of note is that we're very concerned and eager to introduce the idea of bridging from McNair Peninsula to the river frontage on the Basin Street property and the Scannell property which would thereby create a link to from all the way from downtown for bikes and pedestrians all the way to Schallenberg Park. And so I just wanted to insert that, and apologies in advance to Heather if they were able to make that change from last night to tonight. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for joining us. Okay, I don't see any other raised hands, so we are going to go ahead and move on.
Dave, can I just, for the
sure.
record, just mentioning that I believe there's been 2 written public comments that have come in and have been emailed to the GPAC.
Excellent. Thank you, Heather. Having a minor malfunction here. Hold on one sec. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share screen again. And I'm going to hand it over to Ron to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Heather, Mariana. Good to see everybody this evening. So as Dave mentioned, we're going to mostly spend tonight getting your thoughts on what does it mean, some of these key findings from our existing conditions work looking forward through the planning process. But before doing that, we wanted to briefly bring you up to speed on some project updates, make sure everybody's clear about where we are in the planning process so that they understand why we're doing what we're doing now and discussing what we're discussing now. And also for members of the public so they can, if they're new to the project, can also bring themselves up to speed and remain involved. So again, you've seen these slides before, but this is a brief recap and contextualization for tonight's meeting. General plan updates are incremental in approach, typically. They're phased. In this case, we've identified 7 phases for the project. I did want to stress here that importantly, and this relates to a couple of comments or emails we received from some GPAC members, for tonight's discussion, it's important to remember that discovery is like one of the very first phases. It's really the first work phase of the project. And it's a foundational first step, followed then by visioning, which is another high level but community driven step. And it's only after those 2 do we really get into the heart of planning, how to align land use, the built environment, and related policies and programs. So I know, like me and everybody else, we're all anxious to get into the meat of the planning exercise, but we do need to remember that we're still at an early phase where we're simply confirming and summarizing and capturing baseline technical conditions. And so we need to make sure we have those right as a platform for moving ahead with the planning process. Next, yep, thank you, Dave. So again, even though we move somewhat step by step, we also are doing several things concurrently. So in addition to discovery and existing conditions work, we, as you know, have been doing a variety of activities supporting community engagement and input on developing vision and guiding principles. As part of some of that engagement, also been getting people's input on different areas for discussion around the city that we might consider as areas for change in land use or other improvements, all of which also informs and serves as a foundation for the housing element that is due at the early part of 2023. Again, this is kind of just for the context. We'll talk about this more obviously later. The purpose of the existing conditions work is to establish baseline technical conditions. Most of these are now very near final, so you should be getting them in the very near future. As Heather mentioned, they're hundreds of pages in length, so you can understand why sometimes it takes some time to make sure we have the most accurate data, talk to the right people who sometimes are the keepers of that data, and make sure we're summarizing and capturing everything accurately. So sometimes these things take a bit longer than expected. So we appreciate your patience with that. So again, there's 19, I believe it is, deep dive reports focusing on different topics, plus the summary, existing conditions, kind of integrative summary, which was sent to you in advance of this meeting and which we'll mostly focus on tonight, then can also reference the more detailed sections of that as As Heather mentioned, also kind of as part of this phase and as one of the important touch points that we have with all the city committee and commissions, we've been introducing key insights related to their topics of interest and responsibility and getting their thoughts and feedback as well. We just had one last night, as I think someone who testified mentioned. It was extremely useful, insightful conversation. And then in addition, so that's kind of the first phase, the discovery phase. We're doing concurrently also with the visioning phase, as I mentioned. We discussed this before. We're just going to be establishing vision and guiding principles that will ultimately come before you for final feedback before it goes to council. We'll talk a bit more about the timing of that later. The path to get there, next slide, please, Dave, has involved a significant amount of public input, building on the work the city did in 2020, plus the engagement we've done throughout this year, listening sessions, work with the GPAC, area meetings, pop-ups, the workshop we just had a few weeks ago, on its way to finalization and adoption by the city. So in addition, we've also been beginning to lay the foundations for the alternatives phase by discussing areas of discussion, specific geographic areas around the city that are candidates for new housing, jobs, and other changes in land use, plus potential improvements in roadways, bikes and peds, street trees, et cetera, et cetera. Like the vision and guiding principles, there's a pathway that's on. We're at that third step there in the blue box, where we've taken all kinds of great input from area meetings, pop-ups, and workshops. And then once we've had a chance to synthesize and integrate that, we'll be working towards a visioning diagram, which will be the foundation for the next round of public engagement, more specific to alternatives. And again, we'll be talking with you about that work before we take that deep dive. So that's kind of where we're at. Many things going on concurrently, lots of activity, and your support and guidance has been foundational and extremely valuable in every regard. So thank you again for your service and leadership. We did want to follow up on much of what was the focus of our meeting last month, the visioning workshop. Thanks to many of you who both helped by supporting at the workshop and helping get the word out. And thanks to many of you who also participated either during the workshop itself or using the online tools that have been available and are still available since then. The purpose was to introduce new people to the general plan update if they hadn't yet been involved, and then really focus on three things. Elements of a vision for the future of Petaluma 20 to 30 years out, getting feedback on the values and guiding principles document that you have helped us develop over the course of several meetings. And then through a polling exercise like you did at the last meeting, get people's feedback on specific geographic areas of the city that might merit much greater examination and discussion as we consider alternative land uses for the city. And as you know, and as we experimented with last time, we took an open house approach. The virtual open house was open for 2.5 hours on the evening. Participants could really go to whichever rooms they wanted to and spend as much time as they would like. There was also a Spanish-only room where they went through the same exercises in a more of a sequential basis in Spanish. And then since then and through the end of this week, those same exercises and materials have been available online for anyone who couldn't make it that particular evening. We are still in the process of compiling all that information, obviously, because people are still providing it through the end of this week. But we did want to give you guys a sense of some of the participation that we've received. Again, this is incomplete and preliminary because final numbers aren't in, but we just did want to give you a snapshot. And this connects to some of what Heather shared earlier, some of what we talked about a lot early in the planning process, this whole idea of how best to engage and keep people involved, and very importantly, make sure that those involved are representative of what we know about the demographics of the community. So there's some mixed news here so far, which we'll use to inform subsequent discussion at future GPAC meetings to consider maybe adaptations to the approaches we've been taking with outreach and engagement. So on the left, some of the really good news is that we got a lot of new people involved in the general plan update process through the workshop. It looked like about 2/3. It was their first exposure to the general plan update, which was great. Likewise, also on that same side of the slide, representation across different parts of the city was pretty well balanced, which was nice to see. On the right is our current summary, and this is just reflecting the area meetings and the workshop participation so far, comparing that to the known census-based demographics of the city. So on the one hand, we're capturing about 11% so far of the Hispanic Latinx population, but we know that they make up over 22% of the local population. So there's work to be done there to improve participation. On the other hand, we do ask people income ranges, which helps us confirm diversity of participation as well, and actually have higher numbers participating in lower income brackets than are otherwise found in the city. Renters, it's the other side of the coin, really hearing from more from homeowners so far than renters. Youth is a real area that we've already begun talking about, taking some different approaches with to make sure we're truly hearing from the people who are actually going to be benefiting from the outcomes from the planning we're doing now several decades into the future. And likewise, we're overrepresented a bit with people who are in the older age ranges. So that's just a little bit of context about what we did, what's still ongoing, and the types of folks who participated so far. We did want to pause here since we had talked about this a lot the last meeting, and you've been heavily involved in helping us prepare, facilitate, and support the variety of engagement we've been doing so far. So we want to pause here and just get people's quick thoughts on the visioning workshop, what they thought what worked well, and what we could do better next time. I'm going to turn it back to Dave to support that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Heather, I see your hand up. Did you want to start with a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the youth representation a little bit, because it is something that we've started talking about. And we did a pop-up at the library. We ended up putting some boards and stuff at the library, and then kind of ended that presentation there with a pop-up out in front of the library. And one of the takeaways was it was a way that we were able to talk with more of Petala's youth, more than the other pop-ups and events we had done so far. They, I think coming to the library, whether it was proximity to the skate park, we just had better luck there. This also came up, we were at the Park and Rec Commission talking about the existing conditions report last night. And that was a specific area that was brought up as so important to hear from Petalama's youth, specific to Parks and Rec. So talking about how could we do that, whether it's a survey or how they're using the parks, what they're needing from the parks, and a lot of comments about the existing parks not really meeting the youth's needs of over about 13 unless you played a sport is what some of the feedback from the Park and Rec commissioners was. And then finally, and John may talk about this, I see his hand is raised as well. John has talked with a couple members from the Youth Commission and reached out on how can we utilize these people who are wanting to get engaged, who are a conduit to the high schools. And so talking about how we can structure that and how we can really use some of that that enthusiasm that we have with that committee and helping us to reach more youth. So I just really wanted to touch on the issue of youth engagement and youth representation.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Thanks for that context. I think it's really important. These are definitely your future leaders, and we want to get them involved early and throughout the process. I see a few hand raised. I just want to encourage you all that attended the workshop, that we'd love to get your feedback on how you thought the whole process went, the setup, the format, the input that you heard. And then if you all also had an opportunity to go and test out some of the online tools that were very similar to what we did in the workshops as well, we'd love to hear from all of you to get your feedback at this point. So John, I see your hand up, and then we'll go to Janice next. John, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just to follow up, I did talk to Sam and Bruno, who are on the Youth Commission. They're both from Petaluma High School. And so they contacted me, and I had a long discussion about what they could do. They were not even aware of what the GPAC was and what the general plan process was or how to get involved. So I brought them up to speed a little bit, and they are ready to go to make a big movement over at Petaluma High School to get it onto their news service that they have over. That's a video news service, to organize the various clubs, including Environmental Club and several other clubs that these guys are also like leaders of. And they would like to actually organize a workshop like we've had here, maybe what's at the library, a pop-up, whatever, and do it at the high school. They said, it's not going to work through Zoom. It's not going to work through emails. But if we actually organize an after-school event and go through the clubs and invite folks in to do a pop-up there, that they would organize it for us. And so that's a really good opportunity. I think we need to take advantage of that. And then following up that, I talked to the AP environmental teacher over at CASA when I was over there doing the gardening work. And he invited me in, and I'm going in tomorrow, and I'm going to present GPAC to his environmental science class, and bring back hopefully lots of comments from that small group of students. But I'd also like to say, oh, can we possibly get more students involved at that high school and maybe the other high schools that are here in town, and particularly our alternative high schools that have very high Hispanic populations, and reach out to that population. I think we'll get a whole lot more different information. So I think youth projects, if we could get a couple more folks, even folks like myself, who just go to the schools and just talk to classrooms, that might work, but an actual pop-up would even be better that's organized. The other thing is on the Hispanic, there's 22%. That I've talked to a couple of teachers and the like and others, and the number I hear is that there's in our town that 30% of our households are Spanish speaking. 30%, not 22%, and that's just Spanish speaking. And so I'm suspecting that the census is off. That's what you're using, is the census data. And I really think you really need to go back to the schools. I've said this before. You need to go find out what in the 1st through 6th grades, how many Hispanic students do we have in the 1st through 6th grades? And that's our true population. I think that would be more appropriate to use than census data. I think that number should be a lot higher. So those are just the comments I want to make at this time.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. Yeah, and I'll keep those great ideas coming. We're definitely kind of adding to the list of outreach and engagement opportunities, and those are all great suggestions. John, before I let you off the hook, do you want to give us any feedback on the workshop itself?
The various workshops, I attended lots of the meetings. I think I've just about everything on the Zooms and the like. And I thought it was a great job of gathering lots of information. You've shown your strengths and your weaknesses, just to who is responding. So that is a really good step forward. And I think you've got it nailed down pretty well. The existing reports are pretty good. There's going to be some comments like again, that was just said by Heather about what came up at the Commission on Parks and Rec. And the other thing is on that
John,
list.
So I'm just going to hold that for one second.
Right.
If you have any kind of suggestions on the reports themselves on the existing conditions,
Okay.
we're going to jump into that next.
Okay.
I just want to provide this space just for kind of feedback on the GPAC on the last workshop, and then we're going to give it back to Ron. He'll do a presentation. We'll dive deeper into that if that's okay.
Oh, you guys did a good job.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, John. Next, we'll go to Janice, followed by Jesse.
Just quickly, when I was looking at the numbers, it was age 18, and then we went from 55 and above. So where's that middle age group? Are we missing getting information? Or did I miss that?
Ron, do you want to respond to that?
No, that's a good observation. Early on in the project, we kind of picked that a set of kind of key indicators of groups who, based on our experience, we know can be hard to reach. And so we do have the city data. I'd have to double check whether we're asking about the full age range at each question. I believe we are, but we just haven't been focusing on the full data display as we're kind of gauging our metrics. But we could certainly do that if.
I'm just curious because I didn't see it. So that's
no, we just know that youth, for planning projects typically can be hard to reach, and so we're paying particular attention to that metric.
okay. Thank you.
Janice, any feedback on the workshop or any kind of key takeaways? I know you were there.
No, I just thought it was good participation and a lot of good information. And it seemed like there was an age group there that was not 55 and above. So that's it. Thanks.
Got it. Thank you. All right, Jesse, over to you, followed by Dave.
Yeah, hi guys. John Shribs, is your comment about it's very possible that we have a higher Hispanic population, and to get the data just for the planning team, Petaluma City School District might already have that data if you guys wanted to reach out to them. And secondly, the Petaluma City Schools just sent out a survey to parents who have kids age 0 to 5 about what kind of school district, what kind of programming we'd like to see as parents in the future, whether it be STEAM, Montessori, accelerated, like kind of what we're looking for the future for elementary schools. That was a great survey they put out, and I imagine might be interesting for another survey to come out if you guys partnered with them for us parents with really littles in elementary school to ask them, 4 or 5 questions about the future they want to see in Petaluma. That could be a really sweet way to engage them, like early readers, just simple questions about, how important are parks for you? I just think it would be a really nice little outreach engagement thing that you probably aren't going to get those elementary school kids in a pop-up event, maybe, but they get shy, and perhaps the parents would have more success. Anyway, just an idea for youth outreach since I have 2 littles of my own.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Appreciate that. Next, we'll go to Dave, followed by Roberto.
Thank you. I just wanted to make one quick comment. I really enjoyed the Convio software that was used for the public visioning session. And I'm sure that gives you a lot more granular data to the point that it might be difficult for you to sort out. But I just felt we were getting much broader range of opinions than we got with some of the polling software we'd used for some of the GPAC meetings. So congratulations for that.
Great. Thank you, Dave. And for frame of reference for you, Conveo we use as basically a way to give us direct feedback on the guiding principles. So folks got to get in there, actually see the document, read through the document, and provide sticky note comments they could up and down vote on to provide a specific feedback on that piece of the exercise. So thanks for that feedback, Dave. Appreciate it. Next, we'll go to Roberto, followed by Roger.
I just wanted to extend to John, if he needs help reaching out to the high schools, that if you can include me in any communication. I've gone to CASA and I've given talks in the past. I went there and know some of the teachers that are still there. So I would think it'd be, if it sounds like Petaluma High School is already developing maybe like a model of how to approach it, and maybe it'd be appropriate to see if it was successful and then just kind of copy and paste it over to the other schools. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Be more than happy to help out. And then a question for the team here was, what are you guys trying to, I guess when you're showing the metrics in the previous chart, like what is your goal to hit? Obviously, I know we saw the 1% on the youth, but what would satisfy, I guess, your data collection of the target to hit of these percentages of percentages?
I'll jump in there just really quickly. We really would, the ideal is that folks who are involved and are providing input in the planning process are representative of the diversity of the city. So ideally, if we have 22%, Hispanic Latinx residents in Petaluma, we'd like 22% roughly of people who are participating in the planning process to be of that ethnicity as well. Same for the other metrics, right? So that's the target. That answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you for offering up your time as well. I mean, as we keep reminding you all, you are the conduit to the community for us. So we would love to tap into your network and your ability the best, as much time as you would like to commit to help us connect with all different types of subpopulations, including the youth. So really appreciate that, Roberto.
Yeah, and just one additional thing, John, I do speak and fluently and read and write Spanish. So like be more than happy to help as well there. So.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely plan to follow up with both of you on that as well. Okay, next let's go to Roger.
Yeah, I don't know if it's appropriate or doable, but the group that I think I would be interested is, crosses. I mean, it's either 1 or 2 parent working families, and how we're reaching those. Because in my impression from this committee and even many other groups, they're often the busiest. Yet a lot of the things we're talking about, I think, are really going to impact people that are in that phase where they're dealing with kids and having to commute. So if that's something that could be tracked, I would be very interested in how well we're getting across to those people.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. That is definitely something we can definitely continue to track as we go out. And we found the best. We talked about those pop-ups. It's kind of catching them at times that are most convenient for them, whether it's going to the grocery stores or other places where we know folks are going to be, and trying to get their input in a quick, convenient manner. But any ideas you all have on that front as well, please do share those as we move forward here. Okay, I don't see any other hands up. Thank you all for that great feedback. I'm going to hand it back over to Ron now to take us through the existing conditions report overview. Oh, Ron, I think you might be muted.
Thank you for that reminder. It's been a long week. So thank you all very much for that feedback. Always very useful. And I just quickly on your last comment there, Roger, which dovetails on what Jesse was sharing earlier. With parents, again, like everybody else, it's like catch them where they are. They're going to be paying attention to what comes from the school. So if we can get communications and other opportunities to get their input through via school communications, that's going to be a great opportunity. Again, thank you all. So now we're going to shift gears here and dive into the key insights from all of the existing conditions reports that have been developed. And again, sorry to be a broken record, but I am going to emphasize that these existing conditions reports are a foundational first step. They establish a technical baseline. They often identify issues to be resolved, problems to address, and opportunities to take advantage of. But they do not get into the problem-solving phase, the opportunities analysis that needs to be done, or the exploration of trade-offs between choosing path A or B or strategy C or D. We all look forward to getting there, but we're not there yet. So just again, reminder, because I know people are going to be anxious to get to, okay, so given that, let's do X, Y, or Z, or talk about how we can solve that problem. That time will come, and we certainly welcome thoughts on that tonight if they're top of mind. But just to explain why you don't see a lot of that in the reports, and may have found some of the information like, well, yeah, we know that already, but that's just part of the point, is to confirm that we're all on the same page, all starting with the same baseline set of understanding of the technical situation in the city. What I am sharing with you is the front end of that document that the city sent out along with the meeting agenda, which is that existing conditions overview, which is a single integrative report that really we hope to have serve as a common level of understanding. And so did it in a presentation format to try to keep it accessible in that way. And serve both as a common platform for understanding for the community and all the other folks involved, including yourselves and the planning team. And so it's an attempt at summarizing key considerations that we need to understand as part of context here in Petaluma to inform the general plan update moving forward. As we've mentioned a couple times, there are 19 of those deep dive reports. Not all of them are shown in the bullets here. We had to summarize them a bit. And you'll be getting those as they get finalized. And so tonight's presentation is really just going to focus on like the very key high-level insights from each of those. The report you received also includes 5 to 10 slides that summarize each of those individual reports. We can again reference those as helpful to support tonight's discussion, but I'm not going to go through the entire 150 slides. And so that report is organized at the front end. I think it's 20 or fewer key insights, and then the more detailed sections that are topic specific or report specific. So let me jump right into the key insights. And one other quick caveat, sorry, if you could back up a minute, Dave. The order you're going to see the slides in is a little different than what you received in the PDF of the document. And it actually did it because it's a little easier for me personally to tell the story in the order that I've got them here tonight. It's the same exact information. But cities are complex and people have different ways in which to think about their interrelated parts. I personally came to planning indirectly through a broader community development background and framework. So I tend to think about existing conditions in layers. So I reordered the slides a bit in that respect. So I'm going to start with what I think about as foundational assets and constraints. So really the physical context in which a community grows, that is the natural environment and some of the natural hazards. Then shift to land use, which really fundamentally is people's attempt at distinguishing areas of a place that are appropriate for different purposes. And then shift to infrastructure systems and facilities, which are the systems the community needs to support that desired land use pattern, things like transportation, utilities, parks, and other facilities. Then talk about housing, which is where and how this very basic human need is met based on land use patterns and that supporting infrastructure. And then the demographics, which is just a snapshot of who has actually settled there and is currently calling that place home. And then on to economics, which is really how those people who are there produce and distribute goods, services, and wealth. And then on to artistic and cultural resources, which is how the culture in that place evolves and exhibits. And then finally to some cross-cutting trends and themes. And that's where I'll get into GHG mitigation, climate adaptation, and environmental justice. So just wanted to let you know that I'm going to tell the story a little differently than it's presented in the report, just because it's a little easier for me to explain it that way. So thank you for that context, Dave. Now we can jump right in. So again, starting with the foundational natural resources, Petaluma is home to many important and sensitive plants and animals, and the community has a very strong legacy of preserving and protecting open space, watersheds, and habitat. The community preserves its agricultural and rural heritage by focusing growth within its existing city boundaries. Petaluma is particularly unique in this respect in that it evolved and developed around a natural resource, the river specifically, and the very rich agricultural lands that were in the valleys surrounding. And then it's also got this very interesting and progressive legacy of being very mindful and deliberate about separating urban from rural with the groundbreaking urban growth boundary that was established back several decades back. So on top of that natural landscape are some naturally occurring hazards, and Petaluma, like increasingly many communities around the world and in California, is susceptible to a number of significant hazards, not the least of which are wildfire, flooding, and seismic risk. I'll talk a bit later about some of the related climate change challenges and how they exacerbate some of those hazards. So then as people settled this area, they made decisions about where different types of land uses should be relative to one another. And what's very clear from looking hard at the historical trends and the current state of land use in Petaluma is that the city needs to continue to work very hard to balance environmental protection, hazard mitigation, historic preservation, different modes of travel, lowering VMT, and providing an appropriate mix of housing types and affordability. And it has many opportunities and different options for how to do that, including redevelopment, corridor revitalization, and obviously higher density infill development. To support that land use system, the city's has an elaborate transportation system that's multimodal. Its location and characteristics currently prioritize automobile use, while transportation gaps are fairly acute for people walking and bicycling. with infill and transit-oriented development, complete street policies, and some improved pedestrian and bicycle safety and networks, as well as east-west corridors. There's quite a bit of opportunity for reducing the number of trips in private vehicles, which is fundamental and necessary to meet the city's progressive climate targets, as well as the city regulations related to reducing vehicle miles. Shifting to another type of system in support of the land use patterns, utilities and infrastructure. Water and wastewater systems are currently projected to meet demand, while the stormwater system requires some improvements. And as we all know, and this is the case in many communities throughout California, the electrical grid lacks resilience, and there is much work to be done to ensure equitable access to high quality broadband. Residents in Petaluma, we talked about this last night with the Parks Commission, generally enjoy really good access to parks. It's not universally good, but generally good. 85%, I believe, roughly of residents are within a 10-minute walk of some type of park. But maintenance and funding for the park system are an ongoing challenge. And many people recognize the need for a master plan for the parks and recreational system. Housing. So given that basic framework of land use, infrastructure, transportation, and utilities, how is that, what housing pattern or types of housing is it supporting? So the median monthly housing cost in Petaluma in 2019 was almost $2,000, $19,051, about 20% higher than the statewide median. And so housing cost burden, which is defined by HUD, the federal agency, is if you spend 30% or more of your income on housing. So that is prevalent in Petaluma, with about 18.6% of the city's households spending 30 to 50% of their income on housing. And then another 15% spend more than 50% of their income on housing. So that's, if I'm doing my math correctly, over almost 35%, over a third of the population would be considered housing cost burden. Some other demographics for folks, again, not news, but interesting and important to know as you do planning for a community. The proportion of residents in the age range 55 to 74 has been growing substantially in recent years, with nearly 32% of the population 55 or older. Also, which is not surprising, we talked a lot about it, the city's Hispanic and Latinx populations have grown by over 7% from 2000 to 2019. Also, the city has a significantly higher median household income and a lower rate of poverty than Sonoma County or the state at large. Petaluma is a significant employment destination with a relatively healthy mix of export-oriented and as well as resident-serving industries. City's economy is positioned for growth based on stable, competitive assets, an expanding population, transportation improvements like the new SMART station, and strengths in a variety of industries, including food and beverage, tourism, medical devices, high tech, and others. One aspect of that, of the economy of Petaluma, which is particularly important for land use and planning, is retail. Petaluma's retail sector enjoys strong demand from a large affluent market, which extends beyond the city limits. Retail market in the city enjoys customers from quite a broad swath of the region. And it satisfies demand for commodities, but has less potential for, or has greater potential, for more specialty retail, which is really a reflection of how the retail industry across the country and globe is shifting. And so Petaluma is relatively well positioned to adapt to that shift. Can also reorient some underperforming retail development toward a mix of uses and community services. You're all familiar with some of the shopping centers that are not doing as well, and those are some opportunity sites for either re-envisioning retail and or other mixes of use. Petaluma's arts and culture ecosystem is very vibrant and distinctive, offering some unique competitive strengths relative to other cities. There is strong demand and some untapped potential for greater arts and cultural offerings. But the sector currently doesn't have a tremendous amount of coordinated support and would benefit from some. The city is home to many protected and eligible historic buildings, sites, and districts. However, some records are not current, and the regulatory framework could be refined and expanded to better protect those resources. There's also opportunity for rehabilitation and adaptive reuse, particularly in the central core of the city. And that can be done in such a way that it maintains the distinctive historic character, but also provides greater housing and economic opportunity. Moving on now to some of these broader cross-cutting themes, which from a systems thinking perspective, you might call emergent qualities. One is greenhouse gas emissions and trends. 2/3 of GHG emissions are from transportation, another quarter from buildings. And unfortunately, emissions are rising even though emissions per capita have been falling. Total emissions are projected to decline, but currently not quickly enough to meet the city's goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. And so part of the CAP, which is being done in conjunction with the general plan, will require looking at strategies that are feasible and doable and complement the land use and transportation and other strategies in the general plan. The other side of the climate coin, climate adaptation, that is planning for what at this point are well anticipated to be significant impacts, many of which are exacerbating other hazard risks the city has been vulnerable to for some time. The city's already experiencing some of this climate change, rising sea levels, drought, wildfires, or extreme heat days, which exposes people and infrastructure and buildings and properties and ecosystems to a wide range of stressors. And these are exacerbated by some deficiencies and are sometimes disproportionately affecting some of the more sensitive and growing populations in the city, including elderly adults, low-income families, renters, and BIPOC residents. And finally, and certainly not least important, perhaps most important, based on state environmental justice guidance, there are 9 areas within Petaluma that are considered potential disadvantaged communities. And most of them are exposed to highway-related air pollution and have low access to high-frequency transit. And as we've talked about at previous meetings, state law SB 1000 requires that the general plan include strategies to reduce health risks and prioritize the needs of disadvantaged communities. So that concludes the key insights slides, which are incorporated in the document that you were sent. And really are designed at a very high level in a quick and accessible way to summarize some of the main takeaways from this existing conditions analysis to save people the effort of reading otherwise 1,500 pages of analysis and documentation. So I'm going to stop there, and because we really want to focus our time tonight on these discussion questions. We'd like to know from you what, if anything, is surprising. We've already heard from some of you that this is nothing new. We understand that, but is there anything that is surprising? And then building on that, what are those trends that we are really driving the overall direction of the city and the planning horizon for this project? The existing conditions work identifies a lot of that, but we really are interested in your insights on what you think those key trends are. And then finally, kind of looking forward. So based on these existing conditions, what are the most critical issues that need to be resolved during the general plan update? Again, we're not at the point where we're focusing on resolving those. We want to make sure we're clear about what those issues, questions, challenges, problems, opportunities are as a foundation for moving forward. So I'm going to stop and turn it over to Dave to guide the conversation.
Great, thank you, Ron. So I'm going to leave this up here for a second. We do have a document that we're going to be taking down all your input on, and I'll bring that up here in a second. But I actually might just turn off the screen for a bit so we can all kind of see each other. I'd rather us be able to see each other than staring at my shared screen the whole time. But I do see a few hands raised, so we'll jump right in and get your comments and get started. So Bill, I'm going to start with you, followed by John and Jesse. So Bill, you're up.
Thanks, Dave. See, I just wanted to make an observation about these key insights section. You know, just knowing that people are going to continue to get involved in the process as we move through it. I think, you know, this is going to provide a great foundation for people who might join the process later, you know, the existing conditions summary. But I think at this point, it's kind of high level and sort of lightweight. And I was just thinking that I'd like to recommend that maybe this section get kind of maintained and updated through the discovery process. And, you know, maybe after you meet with the various committees and commissions, you can kind of add their input to the key insights. And then this could sort of serve as a good foundational document for people who, you know, get involved later on. That's it.
Great, thank you for that, Bill. Appreciate it. Next, we'll go to John, followed by Jesse.
Okay, first one, I read the sea level rise, and I've done a fair amount of research in sea level rise and flooding. And I think the three maps that are now on the maps page, they went in. Apparently, I think a flood map got removed from before. I think that was there. But anyway, the sea level rise report, I think we need to include the entire marsh as diagrams in there a little bit more to show you that the entire marsh will be flooded over time and that we need to take action on that. And the city needs to participate because we have a lot of folks who live or work down throughout our marsh system. And then some of those maps were focused on the southern part of the town and include a little bit of the flooding, but I'm hoping that the natural hazards report will come out a little bit more on flooding because I think there's flooding reports that show a lot more flooding expected in the northern part of town, and we need to make sure that that gets included with the sea level rise and make sure those are combined properly. So I think there's going to be a lot more flooding in the north than being shown in our sea level report. The next surprise for me was in the transport. I looked at two numbers. One was the number of people leaving to go to work out of this town. 17 or 18,000 people leave this town to go work somewhere else. And another 20,000 people come into this town for finding work. And if we want to reduce transportation, especially long distance transportation, we need to get the 17,000 to stay here and the 20,000 coming in. We need to rotate, make them find them jobs where they live and get our 17,000 find them jobs where we live. And I think that would be the biggest change in transport rather than just working on what cross-town traffic, that the traffic in and out of our town seems to be a lot more substantial to me than inside of town. So if finding ways of reducing that might be more important for us in the transport area. Then I'd like to make sure that the dredging of the marina gets included in the Parks and Rec department a little bit more about needing the dredging and getting the whole boating industry, because it's stalled right now entirely. And then in the Parks and Rec, also I read the report, and yes, it really do need a plan for the park system. What was not mentioned at all in there was an urban forest management plan. And we have a canopy, and towns are starting to look at the financial value of the forest, the entire canopy on private and public lands. And we really need a plan for the entire forest that we have here in the canopy. And because the value of the forest turns out to be probably similar to the same value as the roads, and should be given the same emphasis as our roads here because of the financial value given to each of all the housing values and the parks and the living conditions here. And the last thing is you use the term BIPAC is being used in several places, even newspapers are showing up, and nobody's defining it for us readers. Everyone's assuming we all know what BIPOC means and what it represents. And so I'm a little confused. I'm still not quite sure exactly what it means and how it's used, but it seems to be a common turning up all sorts of newspaper, magazines, and our reports. And I'd rather see it worded out, not just initialized. So those are the things, my initial comments right now.
Thank you for that, John. That was a lot of great info. Ron, do you want to take a pass at BIPOC, just to clarify for everyone, since you brought it up in your report?
I bet there's GPAC members that can explain the evolution of that term better than I can.
If any GPAC members want to try, if not, I can break it down. Great. Well, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Communities. It's a term that's being seen a lot more in not only in printed media, but kind of different communities are taking it on. And it's a way to really recognize the specific historic burdens and kind of different histories that different communities face. There's a lot of critique and constant back and forth. So it's not that things are settled and that everyone's like, yes, let's use BIPOC. In fact, some communities think that, just similar to what you were saying, John, is that it sometimes erases to just say BIPOC instead of actually spelling it out. So great point to remind us that everyone's kind of in a process of understanding these terms. So we'll keep that in mind.
Hey, thank you, David. And if anyone really wants to deep dive into this, I suggest the Code Switch podcast, which is an NPR program. They focus uniquely on these sorts of issues, and I think at least one of the episodes focused specifically on the evolution of that terminology and some of the differences in perspective on its use.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and thanks for the great definition or description of David. That was really helpful. Okay, next, let's go to Jesse, followed by Dave.
Yeah, hi everybody. Just a couple things. Is it possible to find and collect the data on the number of people that have transitioned to permanent remote work or have moved to Petaluma over the pandemic who intend to stay remote workers, for the implications for transportation and some of those demographics? As it looked like some of the data, a lot of the data you guys collected was from 2019, I assume, because of census and stuff. But it would be interesting to, when we think about long-term planning for Petaluma, what implications the last 20 months will have. I mean, obviously, the future is very uncertain. We've all learned that. But is it possible to collect that kind of data?
As you've noted, the typical source of that information is American Community Survey census data. They collect a variety of different types of data related to commuting and work patterns, distance from home to work, that sort of thing. And there's quite a variety of different ways they make that data available. Sometimes also MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, will do some of their own supplemental analysis. I personally just not familiar with whether ABAG has done that, but we can look into that, or have Farron Pierce take a closer look.
Yeah, it just seems like anecdotally, a lot of the kids that are new at our school, their families moved here from far away and are working remotely and plan to do so permanently. So it just seems like there's a trend we should watch. The other question I had, sorry, I have another one, is do you have data on the empty storefronts and retail spaces from the last 20 months? And as we think about the effects of the pandemic on the retail piece of, rather than census data, is there a way to do like a sidewalk survey?
Ron?
Yeah, I know. I don't really answer that off the top of my head. That's I'm sure strategic economics or Dave Greensfelder would know. I suspect the best source of that's going to be the commercial real estate professionals. But I don't believe we included very current vacancy rates. And as you know, real estate markets shift sometimes pretty quickly. And so it's going to, whatever we would have would be point in time or trends over time.
Yeah, it just seems like, okay. And my last question, sorry, I have another one. Why do you think total emissions are going up in rather than per capita? Is it because of population growth?
I did not personally work on that particular report. So I don't know. Do me a favor. I suspect the answer is in the report itself. I don't remember
let me
off the
look
top
at
of my
it.
head.
I
Yeah, I'm
haven't
sorry.
gone through it yet.
If it's not, you should have let us know. I just don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, no
We
problem.
we can also ask that and follow up, Jesse,
Yeah, just
if
curious
it's not there.
Thanks. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Great questions. So real quick, I just want to show you all where all this information is tabulating, so you don't think it's just going off into space. We are actively keeping track of all your comments here, and we'll come back and kind of check this and make sure that we captured everything accurately. I typically like to just have this off because I'd rather you all see each other's faces. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to that now. And I see a lot of familiar hands up. I just want to encourage folks we haven't heard from: Ali, Delia, Ileana, Aaron, Bill, Yancy, Sierra, Mary. We'd love to hear from you all as well. But great to see all you all contributing. So thank you all for doing that. And Dave, we're going to go to you next, followed by Chris. Dave, you're up.
Thank you. Well, this is a point John already made, but I wanted to make it again, looking at a different piece of data. The number that only 6,000 people live and work in Petaluma was just startling to me. I knew the number would be low. I didn't expect it to be that low. And it just tells us what a challenge we have to meet our climate action goals. And even to decide what jobs, housing balance means in Petaluma. It just, I don't know. I don't know how to get my hands around what that bits of data out of this. One that bothered me was to say that 2/3 of all GHG emissions come from transportation and 1/4 comes from buildings. If you add those up, that only leaves 1/12 of the emissions. And I know there's a lot of ways to break up GHG emissions, and I'm sure both those numbers, there's a good reason in how it's calculated. But if we only leave 1/12 of the emissions coming from consumption, manufacturing, energy, I think we're distorting the picture of how climate impacts are occurring. And I'm just uncomfortable with the numbers we're showing now. And also, I just wanted to talk for a moment on wildfires. In my time here, which is coming up on 20 years, there's never been a major wildfire that reached into the Petaluma, even urban growth boundary. I know a 90-year-old woman who says this never happened in her lifetime in Petaluma. We are certainly impacted by air quality and by refugees from wildfires here in Petaluma, but I think Petaluma is in a uniquely beneficial location to not be impacted by wildfires, and I hope we don't spend too much time focusing on a risk that may not be real. It might be getting worse because of climate change, but I just don't think it's that big a risk as it might be north of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. All great food for thought as we continue to kind of refine these reports and the numbers and how they were gathered. So next we're going to go to Chris, followed by Janice, then to Mary. So Chris, you're up.
Hey, thanks. So just a couple things in the, I would love to have more demographics, especially as they relate to those disadvantaged communities. I wasn't surprised by the fact that 32% of our population is 55 plus, but I'm just wondering, especially in those disadvantaged communities, how many older adults live there? How many young families? Like, where do our most vulnerable people live? And I would love to have more of a snapshot of that, if that's possible. And then the other thing that I found was confusing was the thing about water resources and quality. It seemed really contradictory. It said the city's water use is projected to increase but its supply is not considered vulnerable to climate change. And then it says the water supply is experiencing the stresses of persistent drought conditions, and future droughts will be exacerbated due to climate change. I mean, there's signs all over town. There's a drought, save water. And I'm just wondering what the case really is, and that there needs to be some clarifications with that. So that's all I've got for now.
Thank you for that, Chris. Ron, any follow-up thoughts on either one of those points?
Just quickly, Chris, you're likely to find the more specific data you're looking for on environmental justice and some of the demographics that are involved in that analysis in that health and environmental justice report. We also have a lot more data than we actually have summarized in some of these reports on socioeconomics and demographics. So if there's a particular data point you're interested that isn't currently reflected in a report, let us know. And I'm sorry, which slide was it that you were referring to with your question about the water?
I think it was 51, I think, in the report, or in the, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, it was 116.
Oh, in the gory details.
Yes. But it seems contradictory to me in a certain way. Like, what's the real deal with our water supply?
I think the bottom line is that based on current projections and utility systems will typically, look out at population projections into the future, make some assumptions about household level water use, and then plan their system expansion, source exploration, et cetera, accordingly. Again, I haven't been a while since I've taken a closer look at this report, but I believe part of the assumption in the projections is that household use on average will drop, which is part of the reason. So conservation efforts are making a difference, and so demand drops, and then the supply is not anticipated to be as negatively impacted as to make it such that there's a water shortage in the future. Now, that being said, we know that there's going to be more and more severe droughts. And I believe the projections accommodate that, but much of that is still unknown.
Yeah, well, I just think the language, needs to be real and needs to be honest about, what the situation is, because, all the messaging is, oh my God, we're running out of water, which may be the case. But, so anyway, that just struck me as odd.
But another quick way to think about it is the difference between weather and climate. So yes, there's currently a drought, and yes, we need to preserve water, but long term, and this is what we're thinking about, this is why I want to know this for the general plan, we need to know if there's going to be system deficiencies that are already anticipated in the future. In this case, the analysis currently shows that we don't anticipate deficiencies in the water system through the planning horizon.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for that follow-up, Ron. Next, let's go to Janice, followed by Mary.
Actually, a couple of things. I agree with John Shribs that I think there's going to be more flooding north, and that we really need to look at that. But I was also want to just refer to a planning commission meeting on September 14th that the city wants to move forward in evaluating 221 parcels and actually taking 86 or some odd parcels out and put them into the 2025 general plan. And so that would be incorporated in the 2025 general plan. And these are areas that were in floodways, and it's basically floodway rezoning. And I'm concerned about this because I feel like here we're working on the general plan, and I think this committee needs to know what they're really talking about before going ahead and making changes at the planning commission. Then that goes to the city council, and then that kind of eliminates us from really looking at flooding. And I think it needs to be looked at. And then I was looking at Senate Bill 379 today, and it was on general plans and flooding, and I don't see that there's a reason why this has to be done before the general plan process moves forward, so we understand what these where these lands are. And then the other thing, as far as fire, you know, sometimes I look at the west side of town and I really do get concerned about a fire. And, you know, because it's a different type of housing there than compared to the east side. There's a lot more trees, it's more dense. And so I worry about that, but I also worry about our downtown because there's a lot of basements that are open. And so you have basements from different buildings. And if there is ever a fire under one of those buildings, it could really travel throughout the entire downtown from building to building. And is that something we would look at or get information on to see if there's ever been anything done in the past, because it's been talked about in the past, that could be a potential problem? Is that something we would look into in the general plan? And that's it for right now.
So Dave, can I touch on a couple things? First, I think that the discussion of flooding in the north part of town versus the south part of town, I think the sea level rise due to the tidal influences are much more in the south part of town. That doesn't mean we don't have flooding in the north part of town, and that will be reflected in other ways. But I think the sea level maps are probably more focused on the southern part where that tidal influence is coming up the river. So I think it's flooding and sea level rise, and they're both important and will be reflected. But I think that's the difference between that south and north with the sea level rise discussion. And then I just want to provide a little bit of context to the floodway zone map amendment that Janice has referred to. So our current general plan recognizes that the boundary of the floodway, so the floodway is the part of the city, it's mostly the river, within the banks of the river, although there's areas that it goes beyond the banks, but and it's an area that our regulations are very specific, that no development in the floodway. Very minimal land uses allowed in the floodway. I think it's something like you can have a pumpkin patch, and you know it's very restrictive to what can happen in the floodway. And the floodway is determined by the flood insurance rate maps that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, adopts. And so our general plan specifically references that and says the floodway is determined by the adopted firm maps. So in 2016, FEMA adopted new firm maps, and there was in 2018, there was an update to the general plan floodway to match the new firms, which is what our general plan tells us to do. In our zoning code says that the floodway zoning district matches the firm maps, and is when the firm maps are modified, that those modified maps are adopted by reference. So they automatically get adopted into our floodway zoning. However, our floodway zoning map was not updated to reflect that. So we have the new firm maps that were approved by FEMA, and our zoning code and our general plan reference them as being the boundaries of the floodway. So the effort was to modify the actual map to reflect what is already adopted by reference into our zoning map. This does not change our discussion of flooding, of floodplain, of floodway with this general plan. It does not change our discussion of new modeling, which we now have funding to do and are starting to work on with a better modeling, a 2D modeling. And then it also does not impact our plan to overlay the sea level rise maps as part of this general plan update. So the effort was to match the zoning map with the firm maps that have already been approved and that our zoning code says we already have adopted by reference. So I just want to kind of give that context. It does not minimize the discussion of floodplain as part of this general plan, or of floodway as part of this general plan effort, or our plan to do the updated modeling. but that modeling will take some time. It's not something, we're not going to have the new modeling and the new maps done, next month or, even 6 months. It's going to take some time to do that. It's going to take some time to analyze it. It's going to take time to go through that update to the firm maps eventually too. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context there.
Great, thank you for that, Heather, for that description. Really helpful to get that context as well. All right, Bill Wolpert, I think you were trying to raise your hand earlier as well. We're going to go to Mary next, and then we'll go to Bill Wolpert and then over to Roberto. So Mary, you're up.
Thank you. And thanks for that description, Heather, because I was pretty alarmed by that as well, feeling that we were kind of this lame duck committee where our first task is to help identify these sites, and we'd want to make sure we were part of that conversation. So I just have kind of went through some of the detailed reports. So I'll start with that because I started there. Question on transportation. I noticed that as a comparison, the historic section that was more of the detail, not in the summary, had brought in the general plan language of 2025, but for example, a lot of the other sections didn't. And I just was curious if that was because that section wasn't going to change much, or, it was kind of like copied in there, the high points. So like transportation didn't have that. So I'm imagining there's lots of change with transportation, but I wondered why that general plan language showed up in that report. Should I just go all my questions? Yes.
Yeah, that might be easiest. Yeah, and then we'll try to come back to
Okay. Oh, what was surprising? How much poop there's going to be in 2050? Like, there's so much an increase in solid waste. I mean, can we handle it? That was surprising. And here we have this brand new shiny water treatment plant, and what are we going to do? Hopefully it can handle it. But that was pretty scary. I wanted to know about the in transportation. There was a map on page 14, the proposed, it was a graphic, and it showed the arterials and the collectors and the connectors, etc. There was so it had proposed arterials, and I'm just wondering, because this is supposed to be an existing conditions study, is that an existing condition, the proposed Rainier crossing and the proposed Caulfield crossing? I mean, I've heard of them, of course, for decades, but if it's proposed, it's not existing, right? Then we have this other page, 21, that said the opportunity to cross major barriers, and I wondered if that could be defined. It was a little symbol, a crosstown barrier, I guess, but then I think it was identified as an opportunity to cross major barriers. And then a couple of those areas I thought, well, it seemed like they were placed in areas that weren't very currently very challenged. Like there was one at Payran, and maybe it was the railroad tracks. I'm not sure why that was there, but of course, McDowell and Washington makes total sense, and D in Lakeville makes total sense that those are crosstown barriers. So comparatively, some of these other ones I didn't understand at all.
Hey, Dave, this is going beyond my ability to track on the number of comments and questions. I'm wondering if actually maybe after 3 we could stop and address some of these questions really quickly.
Okay, well then let me also point out that the disadvantaged community map seemed to highlight many areas where there was no buildings and extremely low density, but there was wide swaths of purple, which makes it look like more than half our town is in a DAC area. Let me see, I think I'm almost done with the thought the trends of manufacturing was really positive and answered Dave's question, or like here we have, and somebody else, 10% of residents work here, only 10%. But manufacturing is higher than anywhere in the county. So build on that. Healthcare, I'm not providing solutions, but that was a trend driving direction, which was one of your questions. And I'll just leave it at that since Ron wants me to stop.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm not asking you to stop. I can't, Michelle's not able to keep up, which I was gonna count on as a means to remember to address each of your questions.
Well, you
And-
don't have to answer them all perhaps, but I mean, when do we get them answered?
Yeah, so that was part of what I was gonna respond is like, some of the questions some people are asking are very specific to some of the technical reports themselves. Tonight may not be the best venue to get into that level of detail. I should stress that many of these, if not all, are being addressed in greater detail at the committee and commission meetings. And so if you have an interest in a particular topic, consider sitting in on one of those meetings where they'll get into some of the weeds in some respects. That being said, if people have very specific questions about particular reports, part of the reason we have a large team with people with a variety of different backgrounds and experiences and expertise is because none of us can be experts on all these issues. And so we're happy to address specific questions as follow-up, but I'm not gonna be able to address them all tonight. A couple quick things. You'd asked about, I believe it was connectors that were identified as proposed. What we often will do in an existing conditions report is not only summarizing existing conditions on the ground, but existing plans in place. And so I'm guessing that's what you were seeing, is that a summary of either existing capital improvements that are planned or roadway improvements that are planned. So they're currently on the books as part of a plan, not suggesting that they're proposed as part of the general plan.
Yeah, I think that's a very important one to note, Mary. I noted the same thing, and I think it's it's similar in the Parks and Rec chapter where it outlines, proposed parks, and there was a question like, where did these come from, and where did the acreage come from, and that kind of stuff, and it's directly from the general plan. So it might be too that the historic and cultural was the first one I read, and that one very clearly identified what was coming straight from the general plan. I think some of them, other ones maybe are coming straight from the existing general plan or policy documents, but maybe the way they're just the format of them aren't as clear that that's exactly where they're coming from, but definitely not proposed for, future, the general plan update, but that they're proposed in the existing general plan or the existing, whatever documents that are adopted and on the ground right now. And I think we can, Ron, another thing, looking at the disadvantaged communities map and where there are no buildings, I think that's a good clarification that we could follow up on. I'm not able to respond to that directly, but
Yeah, neither am I. And we're actually, that's one of the reports we're still revising. So, right, is this, you're seeing that in a draft of the version of the report or in the more detailed slide deck, Mary?
That was in the summary here,
Okay.
the 144 page summary. Yeah, I think in health and environmental justice page, I believe.
You remember what page it is? I can look at it really quick, see if I can answer quickly.
Oh, I don't know where health and environmental justice.
Like 100, I think, around that range. Was it that slide, the map with the purple
I
on
can't
that
believe
slide?
I got that far. Let me look. Yes. Yes,
Was it-
yes.
So there's one with purple on 100, another one on 102.
Yeah, I think I was looking at one like 102. It was in the, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you said you thought there was a map depicting no.
I said that there was, highlight some areas where there are no buildings or extremely low density. So to color it all purple makes it, I mean, unless we're just saying that if you live within a certain distance of an arterial, then that gets purple.
No, actually, yeah, this is going to be more technical than we can address tonight. There's a lot that went into identifying those potential disadvantaged communities. Not all that technical analysis can be reflected on a couple slides. So I'm not seeing the reference to vacant uses or lack of housing in these slides myself immediately, but happy to follow up if you'd like to. What I think probably best after we've completed the report and it's available, if you'd look at it in more detail, that might answer your question, but happy to follow up with you.
I mean, my point is a lot of this is open space.
Yeah, these are not designed to be, these are not maps of current uses or building footprint or anything.
I understand. I understand. It's just a misleading map is what I'm trying to say.
Appreciate that, Mary. Yeah, and as Ron mentioned, these are kind of continuing to be refined, and all the questions we're keeping track of here and hope to kind of follow back up with you all. And I would suggest, Ron, too, I mean, if folks have obviously questions after this meeting, they can also email them in, and the team will do our best to respond. There were a lot of technical experts that went into preparing these reports, all of which couldn't be with us here tonight to respond to all your great questions. So thank you for your patience on that. Bill, I know I saw your hand physically up earlier and I didn't get a chance to catch it. So Bill Wolpert will go to you next, followed by Roberto.
Thank you. I discovered that my raised hand is actually under reaction, not participant.
That's right. It could be in a couple different places depending on what Zoom you're using.
I have a lot of topics, but I want to keep it simple. And I think I want to again use transportation as an example. But my thoughts on existing conditions and this collection of data, I would expect to look for the intersections in this data to help shine a light where we have problems. So in the transportation, I was kind of surprised that we have lots of routes, and we list all the different modes of transportation, but we don't have a map that shows hotspots. We know people leave and people come, but where do people go who don't leave? There's lots of movement around town. Obviously, most of it's in cars, and they're not commuting. So if anybody lives next to a school, they know that there's a big transportation issue that happens there twice a day. But on the maps, schools aren't even on there. In fact, there's not even a mention of a school or how it might impact transportation in town. That just seems to be glaring to me. And schools are a whole nother subject. And I know that there's some agreement of anonymity between the city and the schools, that they can chart their own courses. But from the previous conversations that we had this evening about engaging youth, about trying to get the youth part of more actively involved in our community, to get them to ride bicycles, we have to have a formal link to the schools. They can't remain autonomous and have us expect to engage the youth with John Shribs and a couple other people doing outreach. I think it's really got to be a much more formal process because they are intrinsically involved in transportation, as one example. So that was kind of my takeaway, that I would just hope we would use the data to overlay the different data sets to look for the bright spots, and in this case, maybe the hot spots, to find out where do people go between 9 and noon? And does that change between noon and 2 o'clock? And again in the afternoon or in the evening? And does that change between weekdays and weekends? So, and maybe all of that is coming later as we dive into this more deeply.
Yeah, actually, yeah, to that point, yeah, I was remiss in mentioning earlier, anyone who took a close look at the scope noticed that we did not do one of the existing conditions reports at this stage, and it was the level of service analysis, which is exactly what you're looking for, which would typically identify those points of congestion, do it by different times of day. And the purpose for not doing it now was because doing traffic counts when traffic patterns are significantly different than the norm due to the pandemic did not seem like a good use of resources or timing. And so we wanted to wait until either conditions return to something closer to pre-pandemic conditions or something, or the new normal, and or use a different means to get at level of service. There are now different technologies available to either supplement or replace the traditional, things, strips of plastic on the road that track number of wheels that drive over them, which is a typical traffic count. So that is coming, to your point, and we're actually saving it for when we're close to the time where we're closer to needing to use it to inform the alternatives.
Okay. One other minor thing under transportation, there was some data in there that said the average trip distance is 6.7 miles, and yet underneath that it said 1/3 of all trips are less than 2 miles, and 2/3 of all trips are under 5 miles. So that says 100% of all trips are under 5 miles. So I didn't understand where average comes. I mean, I understand where average of 6.7 comes when you have some people traveling 40 miles, but the two data sets didn't seem to merge well. That's all I have.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, we'll have to look into that. And just to your point about reaching out and engaging the youth, Bill, we definitely don't see or putting all the omen on John and team and Roberto to reach out to the youth. We hope that you all will kind of help supplement the outreach and engagement that the city and project team will continue to do to make sure that it's fully comprehensive.
Not youth. I'm talking about schools specifically.
Right.
Because schools influence the youth. If we want more kids to ride bikes, we should be working on the schools to encourage kids to ride bikes.
Great point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for that. Okay. Next, we're going to Roberto, followed by Ali and Aaron. Roberto, you're up.
So I'm kind of glad Bill went before me because he kind of touched on a few things that I also wanted to bring up. So to tie in, the hotspots about transportation, the one thing I was thinking that'd be good to see is, which roads are actually adaptable, right? Which ones can we, if we're talking about in the future and population increase and infill, which roads can we really expand or, add a lane, if you will. It'd be good to see, because as you mentioned, I live by one of the schools where you see traffic twice a day. And if we're going to have more people, moving to Petaluma, it's also important to consider, what is that going to have an effect in terms of population of traveling to school and, impacting those hotspots. The second point that he mentioned about the schools, I was more surprised that there wasn't really a metric that summarized kind of the capacities that the schools were at and what issues maybe they've been facing in terms of just classroom sizes and stuff like that. So I think it'd be interesting to see in the future if we can maybe look at that data. And, I know it's like weird times where there's like hybrid models and stuff like that, but, I think it's still an important thing that we should consider, especially when we've already talked about, the youth in the beginning of this meeting. So understanding the current state of just, the classroom sizes and the education system that we have here, I think it'd be good to know. I want to tie in the two other questions in the discussion notes. For me, kind of the major trends and also what are the critical issues, I kind of morph those into more of a kind of general kind of question for the team, is that it sounds like the city has a goal of hitting, carbon neutral, if you will, but it almost seems that when I look at face value, like a lot of the issues we're facing or the solutions we're giving for this plan is, population increase, more infill, but we already have transportation issues. So what is that going to do? Just kind of make it worse. There is some charts on here about updating infrastructure. Someone mentioned about there was water, there was sewage. Are those going to be modified in the future? Are we going to increase capacity as we increase people? If not, you're just going to make something worse. So my question is, maybe for kind of the people on the councils, like, how are they prioritizing certain changes as we, move forward in making this plan? Because right now I understand we're getting all the details, all the insight of the data, and then we're going to progress to kind of making the plan. But there's a right order to do things, and I can see if other areas of this plan are prioritized, that you're just going to make it harder to fix some of the known issues that we know already by not kind of investing where infrastructure needs to be invested first to do it right, as opposed to doing it the way maybe outer influence wants it to happen. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the data that we saw today.
Appreciate that, Roberto. Yeah, we definitely took down that information. Great insight that we could definitely follow back up on. Okay, Ali, and then Aaron, thank you so much for your patience. And Irene, I see that you raised your hand. At this point, we're just taking comments from the GPAC members, and then we're going to have a section on public comment here coming up shortly. So thank you for your patience, but we'll get to you soon. So next, let's go to Ali.
Hi, thanks. And I think everybody who's made really good points about transportation. I think that's the one I'm going to focus on too. I think seeing the data point about 2/3 of our GHG emissions being from transportation was really stark to see that quantified. And we really need to address the underlying issues of why that's the case. And it was noted in the presentation on the insights around transportation that autos are prioritized and that there are barriers and lacking connections for non-motorized crosstown travel. On the actual technical report on page 27, it noted that the street conditions mean that bicyclists who are quote unquote brave and fearless, or those who have no other opportunity, no other transportation alternative, are the primary people who bike in Petaluma. So, I mean, we need to really change that and address those conditions. And another thing I wanted to note in the technical report was that the the 6 bus lines for the Petaluma Transit were called out, and they listed out the routes and the service, the headways, but it didn't go into any kind of discussion of the existing conditions of whether those routes are sufficient or how many people ride them or who they serve, or I think it really needs a deep dive into what those routes are and who they serve and how to best move folks around. And I think if GHG emissions and climate change and environmental justice is actually important to this community, we need to really address it and not just give lip service. We really need to address it in a real way. And I will just also mention that, sadly, housing and housing unaffordability was not surprising. And that is a major issue that also needs to be addressed in the plan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ali. Thanks for that. And definitely duly noted there as well. Aaron, we'll go to you next, followed by Bill. And Aaron, I got to say, I love to see the cats roaming through the screen with you. That's a nice bit of levity as we're going through this. So appreciate that.
I got to give props to Christine first for her lap friend earlier. So ours were just trying to show each other up. Anyway, kind of touching on kind of superficial things, but really core items that are linked to most of everything that everybody's been offering up, which I thank you everybody for your awesome contributions. I feel like one of the core issues that we do come across when it comes to city and schools is how they act independently of each other. So many times, our residents bring up that on a regular basis, the issue with how separate they really are. And if you have an issue, you have to take it to this. And if you have a problem, you got to take it to this. And city can't do anything here. And we live in the same place. We do not act independently in reality. We are all interconnected, and the involvement that we have, it needs to be more unified, especially if we're going to start taking into consideration, the needs for shift in how we, direct the youth and get them involved and talk about schools and the true traffic that actually exists. And, we need to stop thinking of them as separate when we're all entrenched in it, no matter what it means, like whether it's parents, and their kids, or people just in the community who live near there don't have kids, but it affects them too. So we all have to be able to have a unified front when we're talking about how do we make things better for the city as well as our schools, and how we make things better for our next generation. Those can't act independently of each other. I also want to kind of just go back to a couple things. Like, I want to say thank you, Ron, for finally articulating about the discovery phase, finally, like giving a true reasoning behind why we don't have some of the meat and potatoes that I've been asking for since day one. It just finally was like talked about in a way that was best understood, that, hey, we're doing this and this within this phase. So thank you. One of my issues for like floodplains, and when we're talking about terminology, like when I see something that's saying land use is readily available, I get really, really like tense, because I'm like, I don't consider things that we're kind of talking about in this flood area, this land use, that is actually readily available. I think we need to talk about how we say, here is locations of flood, all that stuff near the car auto row, stuff like that. We need to say is unavailable land, because we should not be building anymore in our floodplains, especially when there's been so much money to research like those exact locations, and we've been informed in a lot of them. So I think, again, taking a shift in our view and terminology will help us to define that and speak about them in a way that is more realistic. I don't want to be a broken record, but reimagining our buildings and the resources and how we use them, hoping that'll help with keeping people in our city to both live and work here. So I want to make sure we're diving into that. I did like seeing that talking about the zoning and the options and the housing shift to uninhabited or unused locations, and trying to shift that to a new use and potentially be a viable place to reimagine. Just a small thing for the current, I know we kind of mentioned like some of these things are like potential things that are offered, kind of like the parks and whatnot that Heather was talking about. I'm sure it has something to do with also in referencing Mary's, like the crosstown connectors. Just making sure that we're actually like making the ones we have safe, let alone like not focusing so much on, well, there could be this in 40 years. How about the one that doesn't have sidewalks and someone died on? Like we should really like focus on those two and bring that to light. That's not much. Sorry, there's not a lot of meat and potatoes from me, but thank you everybody for adding to it. Thanks.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, appreciate that. I saw a lot of nodding heads, and Bill was having a good time with the reactions. I saw a thumbs up from Bill. So thank you. Thank you for all those.
And I just wanted to thank you, Erin, for pointing out the planner speak that we allowed to leak its way into the summary that's supposed to be accessible. Yeah, what the planner who wrote this was meaning is that per the current land use regulatory system, land that is available for development, permitted for development, is in the floodway. So, but that's an important use of language we need to be more careful about.
Yeah, it's scary to think that those are the things already in place. So having to take that all into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, let's go to Bill, followed by Roger.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I sure agree with a lot of what's been said. And I just want to add a few more points of kind of high level stuff that I got from synthesizing data. First of all, with the decreasing local retail opportunities from, online sales and I just think we need to concentrate on consolidating our retail experiences and our sort of social gathering spaces. And that means, even if our destination retail, the shopping centers, they just need to be completely transformed, that these need to be our social hubs as well. And they need to be much more high quality spaces for a much broader variety of uses rather than just parking lots with storefronts. So I think that's kind of a consolidation that we should be looking towards of the retail shopping experience, because I see, storefronts are just going vacant We're not needing as much, but we're losing sort of our consolidation and our social interaction that we get from retail. And to that end too, I think we also need a much greater sort of flexible palette of flexible building types. And that means within, you know, as we transform these retail centers or whatever, you know, we need to add buildings that can serve all kinds of uses as they change. I mean, we're losing retail, we're losing the need for office space, professional space, but we've got this housing crisis, and we see vacant buildings, yet we have, you know, such a great demand for housing, and there's just some greatly, you know, missed opportunities. So I think for future buildings, we should sort of be thinking about more flexible building types and opportunities for, you know, reutilizing and adapting our existing building stock. Also, you know, the sea level continues to blow my mind, the sea level rise. I don't fully understand the data, but I would say one thing we need to be planning for from right now is, you know, everything that's built, if it's anywhere near one of these sea level rise zones, needs to be designed for, you know, periodic inundation. I mean, we'll have to figure this out over time, but starting now, I mean, knowing what we know, it just seems like, okay, you know, there are great cities all over the world that deal with, you know, regular inundation, and life goes on. And, you know, so I just think that needs to be one of the fundamentals of how we build anything from here on. One thing I do want to restate is about the urban forest. I completely agree. And I think it just needs to be elevated, whether it's a Parks and Rec thing, or if it's a, you know, a public works infrastructure thing. It needs to be funded as, you know, a major part of our community. And that means we need to have, you know, funding for mitigation, monitoring and management, maintenance for the urban forest. And then one last thing regarding the map with the purple, that disadvantaged zones, I just question the kind of categoric branding of everything along the highway as disadvantaged just because of, you know, air quality. I don't know if it's been tested, but from what I understand, you know, the air quality along the highways is nowhere near as bad as it is in dense urban centers, you know, where people love to live and where we want people to live. So I just don't see that, especially since it runs right through the middle of our city, that property should all be branded disadvantaged just because it's next to the highway. So that's all I'm going to offer for now, but thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for that great feedback. I see a couple more hands raised. I just, again, wanted to provide space for those that haven't had a chance to contribute as well. Delia or Ileana or Sierra or Yancy or Josh, we'd love to hear from you as well before we wrap up feedback from you all and transition to the public comment. But I'll go to Roger next, followed by Janice.
I will be brief. This whole process, I'm always wondering, I'm not being a planner, you know, how much a general plan can and should do, you know, or reach out. And there's a lot of things talked about that I'm never sure what's in the purview of a general plan. But in the sea level rise part, which I do know something about, and I'll give comments in written, there's a lot of measures that are not actually really appropriate for Petaluma. And then there's some things that are really not talked about that is really where the game is going to be. Certainly because sea levels continue to go up, which is a retreat redevelopment, the rise of groundwater. That's another one which tracks with the right tide. So we see it all over other places where, you know, the ground gets soggier and soggier over time, has to be pumped out. When you build a wall or a levee higher, which you know this thing sort of alludes to, you have to pump behind it. So we start having a lot of impacts. And but I certainly think if it's within the purview of this plan to start thinking about at least mentioning where the game is really going to be, which is where we retreat and how we do floodable redevelopment. Which is a little bit getting at what Bill just mentioned. You know, how do we design the cities? You know, it's not like river flooding, which is, you know, during a storm and then go down sea level. Yeah, so it's a different kind of adaptation, but it's much harder. But where they've done it in some cities in Europe, to the extent they've done it through redevelopment. That allows for the water. So it's a really big thing. No one's been able to really crack that very much in the US. We're a very individualistic place as opposed to the Dutch, much more mission driven. So I'll make these comments, but I think to the extent that that's within the purview, I think that'd be something to note is going to be played out across coastal US all over, because eventually, nature bats last, they say, and the power of water as the bay goes up will overtake, our ability to raise levees, to pay for it, to pump behind it. And so I think those ideas maybe should be captured in terms of realignment and redevelopment. So thank you.
Let's have Petaluma be the first US city.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Roger. And Roger, you mentioned wanted to dive in kind of deeper into the topics that you're most interested in. I think there's going to be continued opportunity to do that moving forward here, as we kind of have more targeted discussions about different topics and being able to kind of pick a subgroup maybe, or subgroups of the GPAC to dive in deeper into those individual topics. So keep that in mind as we move forward here.
Oh, just one last comment that maybe make me less popular is I'm not a believer in the dredging. It's not really effective. It fills right back in, expensive, a lot of greenhouse gases. So I think that's one where I would take issue with some of the conclusions, but we're going to have different opinions. So I think that one would be best thought out in a smaller group.
Sounds great. Thank you, Roger. Ileana, it's great to see your hand up. Janice, I think you were up next, and then we'll come to you, Ileana.
I'll just go quick. I just want to go, just point out that when we're talking about flooding and sea level rise and thinking it's only going to be in the south, there are 13 tributaries north that flow into this watershed. And, when you have the perfect tide, that's when we always have the flooding, and the flooding has changed since the flood walls are there. But when I'm looking at the long-term potential roadway improvements, I don't ever see that Corona is included in that. And yet we're looking at a rail station right by that overcrossing. And then I'm reading that the Petaluma Boulevard grid improvements would provide a grid of streets north Petaluma adjacent to the Rainier Avenue extension, planned southward extension of Industrial Drive. Industrial Drive is where Corona Road is. And then you'd be going right through where the auction yard is, which most people know where that is. And that entire area, is the city have different, what is the plan? And that's where I'm concerned about this zoning changes. Because you're talking about taking a roadway right through really sensitive areas, right down the Corona Reach. And so this doesn't seem to make any sense. And the fact that Corona is never mentioned seems to be an omission. It should be changed. And we might, as far as schools, the school board would be the best place to start with and see with, how they can actually help participate and get participation, not just from students, but the parents also. That's it. Thanks.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Janice. Thank you for that. Okay, Ileana, you're up.
Thank you, everybody. I had two questions that I don't think it was brought up earlier. In the sea level rise and climate challenge report, I had two questions about, I understand there's going to be a plan of dredging next year, but I wanted to ask how the general plan will take future dredging needs into account. And also, the other question is how long it will take for climate modeling to be integrated into future flood mapping. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ileana. Ron, did you have any response to that?
The question of the day. That's not an easy one, the second one in particular. And I apologize on your first question about dredging. I'm not an engineer or a dredging expert, and so I can't immediately answer that. But it should be addressed in the SLR report. We'll have to double check on that one. I'm sorry. The simple answer, and it's more complicated than this to your second question, is that there aren't any single perfect models that incorporate projected sea level rise plus a variety of different types of storm and flooding events, plus storm surge, plus the whole other range of factors that contribute to a level of sea level rise at any given moment or a longer period of time. And so what we find we have to do is do the best we can with the information we have. There are very robust models projecting sea level rise. And as Heather mentioned earlier, the city is working on updated flood analysis. We'll look at those together and do our best to make reasonable and thoughtful and science-driven assumptions about what they mean together. But as is often the case in life and in planning in particular, you sometimes have to do the best you can with imperfect or incomplete information. But recognizing the importance of this issue for Petaluma, we're going to get the best data we can and do the most robust analysis we can to make sure that the community is making the most informed decisions that it can.
Yeah, I'll just add, I was looking at to see if Gina Benedetti Petnick was still with us, but she had to drop off. She would be great to respond to some of the questions on the planned flood modeling and then the overlaying with the sea level rise. That is part of the plan. She's able to speak to it much more eloquently in terms of the newer modeling, the 2D modeling. So we're using, kind of like Ron said, we're using a couple different mechanisms to overlay them to understand, kind of the cumulative of better modeling as well as sea level rise. And then in terms of Gina, would have also been great to talk about the dredging. So we did recently after what was it? More than a decade of not dredging. We did have dredging, was it last year that the dredging happened? I'm seeing Aaron nodding. It's all kind of muddling itself together over the last 2 years, but we did recently do the dredging, and then there's a real focus on figuring out what we do and how we work in a regional partnership and collaboration looking forward, because what it was we were depending on the Army Corps to dredge, and then the Army Corps didn't dredge. So it was kind of okay, let's dredge this last time, and we were able to dredge. And then before we need to dredge again, we really need to be thinking about, are there different ways to do this? Are there partnerships on a regional level that we should be using and looking at? So that is something that the city is actively doing right now.
Great, thank you for the questions, Ileana. And all these questions and comments are definitely been recorded here on our virtual document that will show up in the summary with hopefully some follow-up as well as some of the questions raised. Josh, great to see your hand raised. You're up.
Yeah, thank you. Not a lot of unique perspective for me to add tonight, but the one thing that I heard a lot of appreciating a lot of the comments tonight. The one thing that I heard that I really felt like I should chime in to underscore was this notion that we need to make Petaluma a place where people are living here and working here. And I don't know, I know that's a big multifaceted thing, and I'm not sure how we approach that, how we break that down, how we crack that through this process. But it just seems to me like an important issue for us to try to take head on.
Great point. Thank you, Josh. Sierra, great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you. Similarly to Josh, I don't have any big insights to share on top of all the good things that have been shared already tonight. But I did just want to make one tiny note that I would like to get into the comments for this meeting. A few people talked about the purple map, and I just wanted to add a layer of another thought to that. It's a good reminder to myself as well to think. We have to think about all these things. And these things should be portrayed very intersectionally. So with that map, it's not just whether you live by the highway, but it's actually thinking about, oh, a lot of that land is actually rented land. It's not homeowners, it's not landowners. Those are people renting. So they might be have a more disenfranchised position. It's not just because they live in a certain place, it's how they live there as well. So just wanted to give that reminder that was given to me by a housing advocate, just to get that into our minds as we're thinking about the intersectionality of what these maps look like. It has another story. There's a lot of different stories that go into this.
Great point. Thank you, Sierra, for that. Okay. Sure.
Can I add one thing
Sure,
before
sure.
we go to public comment?
Sure.
I just wanted to touch on the discussion with schools has come up a number of times, and definitely will continue to work on making those connections. But I also just want to let this group know that we have done a number of things and reached out and started, trying to make those connections and have those discussions that started back in 2020 before we did the request for proposals, and made presentations. I think it was to like student government classes at the high schools to try to get some early feedback from youth. David has been reaching out and talking to the school district. So I just want to let you know that we have been doing that. We have been talking to, I think it's, I'm forgetting the woman's name that is the head of the Petaluma. What's her name?
Chris Stone.
Yes. So we are doing that. We will continue to do that. And then also David is going to reach out, John, to you and Roberto and those two youth commissioners and kind of start, a conversation about how we can really capitalize on that and support that effort from those youth commissioners at the Petaluma High School. And then I think it's a great idea if there's some kind of outreach templates that work with at Petaluma High School, then taking them to some of the other schools. So just wanted to let you know that was happening.
Great. Thank you, Heather. That was a topic that came up continually throughout the conversation. So that was important to put a bow on that as well. So great. Thank you all. You all just jumped right in and answered all three of those questions we went through, so we don't need to go back and revisit, but that was a lot of great information for us to take back to the team as we continue to refine the analyses. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move to public comment. Irene, I know you had your hand up earlier as well. I do see one hand up now. I'll give you all a chance to, and just as a reminder, you could find it in your participant window depending on what version of Zoom you're updated on, but in most cases you will find it under the reactions button, and you'll see the raise hand there. So with that, I'm going to bring the timer up, and Eric, I might turn it back over to you to run this portion.
Thanks, Dave. I'll go ahead and start with Pete Gang at the top of the list. Pete, I've asked you to unmute. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. First, I wanted to offer praise, congratulations for this very complete, easily understood, easily readable presentation. And at the same time, I just wanted to make one comment, which is this: the extent to which this summary downplays the climate crisis is truly breathtaking. In the slides that were presented tonight, the Petaluma's greenhouse gas emissions were only talked about in terms of our activity-based emissions, our direct emissions. In the 2018 Community Greenhouse Gas Inventory that was released as a part of the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, it points out, in addition to our activity-based emissions, there are what are called consumption-based emissions, which for Petaluma in 2018 equaled 150% of our activity-based emissions. If we hope to get anywhere close to carbon neutrality by 2030, we absolutely cannot overlook our consumption-based emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. And up next is Dwayne, followed by Sarah. And Dwayne, I've asked you to unmute yourself.
Thank you. First thing I wanted to comment was on the discussion of the FEMA flood, the 1916, I'm sorry, the 2016 and the 2018 changes in the general plan, is that in 2015, our then president asked that sea level rise be included in the FEMA maps. And his successor in 2017 pulled that out and reversed that. So if you're incorporating the 2017 FEMA maps, you are not including the sea level rise statistics that had been earlier included. A couple other points. They don't talk about, when they talk about sea level rise, that the fact that you'll get king tides with the full moon. It'll be interesting to see what kind of flooding we get this weekend with the what do they call it, the oceanic river dropping it here, and we've got a full moon, and we could have king tides. So they'll give us some basic information. As far as the 16,000 people who drive here, I'm sorry, the 22,000 and the 18,000 that leave, not much we can do about the 18,000 that leave, but the 22,000 that come here, we could certainly poll some of them and ask them what kind of incomes they have and what kind of housing they would like to buy here so that they could live here. I would suggest that the purple maps showing low income possibly is influenced by a motel located on North McDowell, and it has low income. And that the one other point, that the schools, at least one set of schools, deliberately designed their two schools so as to have them walkable by the new communities built around them.
Thank you, Dwayne. And up next is Sarah, followed by Taryn. Sarah, I've asked you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi there. So a lot of folks way smarter than me have been weighing in and everything, so I just want to really appreciate that. I had a few observations that I made tonight that kind of concern me. The areas of interest almost entirely map to the higher renter like areas, those areas along 101. And those are areas that are particularly vulnerable to gentrification and are already experiencing that. So as well-intentioned as developing in those areas might be, it's really typical that development in low-income areas can like displace the folks already living there. And you're looking at regional parity within the city as being northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest, but at the same time, the areas of interest that you're making decisions about developing and gathering input about are along that 101 corridor. It's a completely different shape, the part of the city. And so that means that there's no regional metric for participation, at least not that I've seen, of people who are living in those areas of interest. We do have a metric in terms of renters, which kind of confirms that those areas aren't being outreached to effectively yet, given that there's that 15% percentage point gap in terms of renters in the city and renters participating in events. So I recognize the need that we, for building affordable housing, but it should be, we need to have actionable plans for maintaining and improving the stability of those communities. And if these communities aren't engaged in the process, they're absolutely going to be put at risk for displacement in this plan. And I just really appreciate the way that Sierra put, we can get numbers, we can get more data. I love data, but there's humans underneath that, and kind of just have to look around.
Thank you, Sarah. And up next is Taryn Obaid, followed by David Powers. Taryn, I've asked you to unmute.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate the discussion, and wow, what great comments from GPAC members. I really appreciate the younger people's perspective. I'm here to tell you that as a retired data analyst, Yeah, flood modeling is multivariate, right? Multiple variables coming from multiple data sources. And it now can be smarter than it's been in the past, which is saying a lot. But also there is a story here. In my neighborhood, I live in this flood zone. A lot of us are renters. There are homeowners who have been here for 40, 50, 60 years. And there are young families here, a lot of Spanish speaking families here as well. And the story is we flood every 2 years, comes into our garages, into our yards. The story is that no, the river has not been flooded up here. It is shallower and holds less water than it did a couple of years ago because it's been channelized. And there's more detail on what channelizing a river does, but downtown was dredged, and that was all for the tourists to be able to come and look at a pretty river because it was looking awful when it was silted in. And that's what we have up here. The storm drain exits into the river are silted over, and that's why the storm drain backs up into our neighborhoods and our river roads flood, our garages flood. So what I see lacking in the existing conditions report is basically the upper river access and enhancement plan. It's barely mentioned. It's basically swept under the rug. It needs to be out and prominent because you cannot develop north of the flood dam and the flood wall. Yet it keeps getting swept aside in favor of discussion of development under that Rainier underpass now. That cannot happen for social equity reasons.
Thank you, Taryn. Up next is David Powers, followed by Veronica O. And David, I've asked you to unmute.
Thank you very much. I also want to add my appreciation for what clearly is a mountain of effort by not only the consultants, but by every member of the GPAC and the advisory committee. It's extremely impressive and it's heartwarming as a resident here to know that people have donated so much time and effort to this. I'm trying to analyze so many different things from what I've heard here tonight. There are some overriding serious existing conditions such as sea level rise, transportation issues, adaptive reuse of vacant buildings and malls, and I think an underlying question of social equity. And one of the things that I'm very, very concerned about myself is something that Bill Reinhardt mentioned a little while ago, which is the lack of an urban forest management plan here in Petaluma, which I think is an overriding high-level strategy, would address and cross many of these issues. It would help address the sea level rise problem. It would certainly affect transportation by increasing walkability. As far as adaptive reuse, it would transform some of these parking lots in front of the malls, make them more livable. And it would certainly address some of the issues that we're seeing along the highway where 900 redwood trees were recently removed by Caltrans in order to make way for the widening of 101. That does impact the people that live on the other side of the sound wall. And certainly a tree planting program would help improve the quality of life over there. So I think that it would be very, very gratifying to see trees take a more prominent place in the general plan. Thank you.
Appreciate your comment, David. Thank you. Up next is Veronica O, followed by Irene Collins. Veronica, I've asked to unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening, GPAC, staff and community. I also like to extend thank you to everyone for all the hard work and the robust discussion. After reading through some of the reports, the thing that I wanted to highlight was the transportation existing conditions. It didn't really highlight the fact that we have the 67% GHG in Petaluma, and we need a radical rethink on transportation planning and design. and that we don't have safe streets for bicycles and pedestrians, and our housing and transportation balance is very wonky. We've all been talking about that tonight, or people have mentioned it, but how do we make assumptions that we're going to still be in our cars and building roads and having plans for roads when we need to look at innovative ways where people can be on their bikes, like complete streets, as a trend in the transportation existing conditions? So I'd like to add that. Also, native trees and tree canopy would be part of that. Because to me, we can't have streets without trees anymore. We have to have it in order for bikes and pedestrians to want to participate. The other thing in terms of transportation was our existing proposals. Some of them have not been looked at in terms of our climate emergency framework. So I think having a way to identify and quantify things through the climate emergency framework as a way to go through the opportunities would be a good start. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. And next we have Irene Collins, followed by Beverly at Protect Wild Petaluma. Irene, I've asked to unmute yourself. Sorry, Irene, you're still muted. Irene, we still cannot hear you. Irene, I'm going to move on to Beverly. Maybe you may check and see if your microphone is properly suited.
I think you had it unmuted for a second there. Maybe send that message one more time, Eric.
I'll try once more. And again, Beverly, I've sent a request for you to unmute yourself. You'll need to.
There you go, Irene, you got it.
There we go.
Yes, there we go. We can hear you.
First of all, as a longtime county resident and scientist, I have a number of thoughts. But first, what you're neglecting is all the people like me who live outside of the town but come into town. That's a lot of traffic. It's also a big economic impact. We prefer to shop in town, but that does generate traffic. Also, people in town run around on errands, they go to restaurants, they go shopping, it generates traffic. And none of that is being considered in your report that I've heard. The other thing is, as far as building on the floodplain, that's the reason I came tonight to listen. There's a reason why it's controlled. Marshland is a big sponge, it absorbs pollutants. The other thing is, if you build by the river or on the floodplain, you're going to have buildings on alluvial soil. That soil will liquefy in an earthquake. Your buildings are going to sink and it shakes like jello. So that is a terrible plan. As far as flooding elsewhere, go up to Denny's, Cattleman's, north of town. It's a tidal slough. The tide goes all the way up there, and climate change is going to make the situation far worse. Lastly, all this building drains the aquifer, and the aquifer is finite. That's it.
Great, thank you, Irene. And up next is Bev at Protect Wild Petaluma. Beverly, I've asked to unmute yourself.
Okay, got it. I was trying to do it too soon. Irene said a lot of good stuff, and a lot of other people have too. But part of what concerns me is that we tend to look at our situation in a very human-centric way. And it's like we're visiting another country and we're not speaking the right language because we think our language is the only language, and we think our food is the only food, and our clothes are the only clothes. And so we need to look at our environment as a home that we're visiting, and we need to learn the language. We need to learn how things work here. And we need to be able to live here in a way that that we're not damaging our home. Somebody mentioned the possibility of building with an idea of flooding, so that you would build in a way where if it flooded, it would be okay somehow. But building in a place that floods is colonial, is in a way like raping the land. And we do live in an area that floods, and we need to leave those places alone and only build in the areas that don't flood. And we need to maintain our biodiversity and all of our native plants, because plants that are not native are basically sterile when it comes to all the other organisms in our environment. So I'm just asking that we not act like a colonial power in our environment.
Thank you, Beverly. And moving on, we have a comment from Merrick. I've asked you to unmute yourself. You'll need to do the same on your end.
Ca sội làm ăn bươn trải, liều thì ăn nhiều, không liều thì ăn.
Merrick? Well, I'm not sure that that was a public comment or not. Merrick, are you able to unmute yourself?
Okay. Eric,
Ăn một tí mất tiền, phải chấp nhận mạo hiểm, nguy hiểm một tí, nhưng trong tầm kiểm soát, anh hiểu chưa?
Well, I'm not sure that that was a public comment. I did mute that time. So I'll pass it back to Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And I appreciate, again, all members of the public for sticking with us. I think I jinxed it by saying we might end early tonight. There was so much great discussion that we ran it right up until the end of the evening. So thank you so much for your patience and sticking it out with us here till the very end. So with that, oh, and there goes my system here. We wanted to provide you, I mean, you all have already provided such great comment. If you had any final thoughts before we kind of talk through a little bit of next steps, this would be your opportunity. But I'm sure you are probably all exhausted from the conversation that you've already provided us. But any other final thoughts based on what you've heard from others, what you heard from members of the public before we talk about next steps here and get you on your way right on time? Oh, I see potentially a member of the public. Unfortunately, we've already wrapped up public comment, so we'll come back to that maybe next time. So with that, Ron, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk through next steps.
Yes, thank you, Dave. Thank you, members of the public, for always very thoughtful, insightful ideas and questions and comments. And again, GPAC members, thank you very much. You gave us what we were looking for in terms of reactions, responses to ideas generated by the existing conditions work. So just very briefly, coming up next, we already very much appreciate the vigor with which you've embraced your ongoing homework assignment here for the coming weeks. We do really would really like everybody to digest each of the existing conditions reports. One of the unique roles of the GPAC is to really help us look at the city from a whole systems perspective. And part of what helps in doing that as we proceed in the planning process is a foundational understanding of some of this basic information across a variety of topics. So please take the time, if you would, to review those. They're designed to have short introductory overviews as well as key insights, which at a minimum provides some really good guidance on what the details are in the reports and can help you navigate places where you want to take a closer look. Coming up in November, after we complete the period for public input from the post-visioning workshop, we'll be summarizing and compiling all of the input we heard from community through the variety of mechanisms, pop-ups, area meetings, workshop, etc., moving us towards the development of vision and guiding principles. So you can look forward to that in November. Already mentioned the ongoing committee and commission meetings, and I would encourage you again to participate in those that are on topics specific to your interests, because they are more specific conversations about each of the that many of you have spoken to. In December, like we did tonight with you, we'll be summarizing for the City Council these key insights from the existing conditions work as a point of closure for that phase of the project, to make sure they're well aware of some of these basic conditions and have an opportunity as well to weigh in on what that might mean for what direction we take from here with the planning process. We're also in the process of planning some educational forums which are designed to touch on a few of the key and perhaps most critical issues, many of which you have pointed out tonight, and bring them in an accessible way, perhaps drawing on some external expertise to the public through some educational forums focused on some key issues. So those are coming up as well. Again, thank you all for your time tonight. I'm going to pass the baton finally back to Heather if she'd like to say any closing words.
I just want to again thank the GPAC and thank the members of the public. Great discussion. So thank you for your time, and we will see you next month. And some of you, we will be reaching out about some of the outreach we talked about. And I do see Roberto. If you have a final comment.
I have a quick question. As we start kind of going through all these reports, I was wondering if there was, besides looking at the old general plans, if there was like a chart package or some sort of brief of what the current priorities are of the current government leadership, so we can kind of get an understanding where their heads are at in terms of, you know, the priorities for the city. So when we're kind of reading these reports, we have some kind of context of maybe agreements and disagreements as we start going into, you know, finalizing the visioning phase.
Sure. What comes to mind immediately, so a lot of the adopted policy documents are on that planpetaluma.org website, or links to them. And it should be, but I'll have somebody double check. The City Council adopted citywide goals and priorities for the next 2 years. And so that's a great place to kind of look at what the City Council has put out there as the most immediate goals for the city over the kind of in the short term. And if they're not up there, we'll make sure they get up there.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So good night, everybody. Thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you in November.
Bye all. Have a great night.
Recording stopped.